Welcome to NIPFP Podcast, and today I have the pleasure of hosting Dr. Rathin Roy, who is a former director of NIPFP and now a distinguished professor at Kautilya School of Public Policy. I'm sure he's very well known and we're familiar with all his good writing. So I have a few questions for you, Rathin, and I'm going to dive straight into it. One of the things that all of us are worrying about is that this is not an unprecedented time, but it's exceptional in the sense that there is a war, the result of a lot of unpredictability from the US, and what we're seeing is that there are expectations around elevated levels of inflation. There's also issues with government support, because what we are hearing now from the European Union is that there's going to be a long-term effect on energy security. And I think that's true for a lot of other countries as well. So in this circumstance, what do you think is the future for rules that economists have set over a long period of time as a measure of stability, which is setting fiscal rules and inflation targeting? Do you think that can we hold on to these targets in such times, or should we pause, and how long is the pause possible?
Okay, thank you. When you say we, I presume you're referring to India. So I'll answer that.
India and the world, I would say.
And the world, okay.
Yeah.
I would first distinguish, and I've always been uneasy about this, between fiscal rules that apply in countries at steady state equilibrium, which means basically, for the general audience, rich countries, countries that have already arrived, countries that have not even started, which are LDCs, which India has graduated from, and countries like India, which we call emerging economies. We need different rules in these three sets of countries. So if you ask about a movement from stability, the kind of fiscal rules that you had, for example, for the fiscal deficit and inflation in a stable economy, was that with population roughly constant and with the capital stock being what it is, short of technical change, the prospects for high growth, by which I mean at least 5% plus, are limited, are absent in the long run, and limited apart from one or two black swan events that happen sometime, such as the Biden administration saw in the US. In those circumstances, therefore, you want to keep inflation as low as possible to improve predictability of spending and to reduce vulnerability. And therefore, you set an inflation target which is in the low single digits. And you also realize that when the government borrows and spends money, especially current spending such as transfers or spending on merit goods, then such spending unchecked can cause inflation, because there'll be more money in the economy due to demand for these things, but the supply response will not be there, and therefore you would get inflation, and therefore the fiscal deficit too needs to be kept low. That's for developed countries. Now that one variable unlocks in the case of emerging economies, which is growth. So here the question comes, how do we maintain the fiscal credibility of the government and ensure that inflation is at levels that are credible and don't harm, right? Such that the country can maximize its growth with reasonable price stability, not necessarily just a low level of inflation, okay, going forward. In my view, there is a particular constraint in the Indian case, which is very important, which NIPFP I think is the best place to say this. Dr. Rangarajan, one of our former chairmen, came up with this target in the early 2000s of 3% fiscal deficit GDP ratio for the government of India. The reason he did that was because he wanted growth. And the reason he was afraid that levels of fiscal deficit higher than that would jeopardize growth is a very peculiarly Indian problem. India invests about 30% of its GDP. About 4 to 5% of that comes from foreigners, FDI and FII. Therefore, it follows arithmetically that 25% of GDP investment is financed by domestic saving. Arithmetically, right? 30% investment GDP ratio, 5% of GDP is FDI plus FII, therefore arithmetically 25% must be domestic savings. But when you go and count domestic savings, what we call financial savings, on a good day they come to about 9 to 10% of GDP. The balance is called physical saving. Now that's an interesting conundrum in itself, but the point is this: the two engines of growth in the economy, the government and the private sector, cannot borrow physical savings. They have to use only financial savings. If the government of India takes 3% of GDP for fiscal deficit, the states take another 3, so 6, and the public sector takes 1.5, that leaves just 2.5% of GDP for the private sector to save. It is impossible to invest, beg your pardon. It is impossible then to even dream about a 7 or 8% growth rate. Therefore, in India, a fiscal deficit target was essential. The inflation target was not a target, it was a band. It is a band between 2 and 6%. And the idea there is that is the zone of predictability within which government should operate. Now, coming to the crisis, we can see that no one has ever, as long as the crisis is genuine, no one has ever negatively commented on the government of India or any other government moving away from its targets or even its zones in a crisis moment, such as COVID. The government of India has also shown that it can credibly come back to its intended target path by very systematically reducing the fiscal deficit from double-digit levels to single-digit levels. Now, it's almost back to where it was before COVID, right? Therefore, if there is a shock, there will be credibility if the government moves away from the target. Likewise, with the inflation targeting zone, I think if the RBI is able to explain credibly why they move out of that zone, credibly, which is not done so far, unlike the government of India, then I think there will be ample room for the RBI to exceed its target. But you can see in this that the target is analytically very important for the citizen and the economist. It provides, in bad times, a benchmark of how much you diverge from. In good times, it provides an aspiration that is consistent with your policy goals. In emerging economies, it adds a third element, which is perhaps something developed countries don't need to worry about. It adds credibility to the formulation of economic policy or macroeconomic policy, and hence it is important to have targets and also important to credibly move away from them when an exigency arises.
Thank you, Rathin. I think it's a sin to ask an economist to predict or anticipate, but do you think that the current crisis will lead to shocks which would be unprecedented in the sense that there would be deviations which would be larger than we saw in the previous years? Or you think that, as you said, there has been a baseline that's been established in terms of how far out we go from our targets, and there will be a sort of oscillating back to our realistic sort of targets that we've set for ourselves?
I've been thinking about this a lot. In fact, I've written about it semi-publicly. Let me start by saying India is in a very good place. Our fiscal deficit has come down to levels which I'm very comfortable with, 4.5%. I do not think state government fiscal deficits are as runaway as some people seem to think they are. I don't think they are. And in any case, there is Article 292 in the Constitution, which enables us to rein in state government fiscal deficits should the occasion arise. I have a problem with the way we are growing and with inequality, but those things will be constant whether there's a crisis or not. On the balance of payments front, we are in a sweet spot, not because we have become like China, in fact, quite the opposite. India runs a structural current account deficit. But that structural current account deficit is financed by the simple fact of FDI plus FII inflows, plus remittances, of course, being greater than the current account deficit. Therefore, our reserves, which is where that extra money goes. Maybe I should explain this for the general audience. If I'm a foreign investor and I come to India and I want to put money in the stock market in Mumbai, I bring $100 million, but I can't give the $100 million to a broker to buy equities, right? I have to give that $100 million to the Reserve Bank, pick up rupees, and then go and buy my equities. If that $100 million that I bring in is greater than India's current account deficit, say India's current account deficit is $80 million, that extra 20 million which has come to the Reserve Bank goes into its reserves. Okay? This has been happening year after year now for many years, such that our reserves now at a very comfortable $700 billion. That's very comfortable. I've never seen it this comfortable in my life. Which means we have room to play. What's the problem? Problem is that what is the net economic impact of this crisis? The net economic impact of this crisis is either that things will not be available. If they're not physically available, then prices will go up very sharply at home, right? Or they will have to be rationing. But more likely what's going to be happening is that everything that we want will be available at a price. And that price will be higher than it is now, much higher. If that happens and government does nothing, then there will be a pass-through in terms of growth, inflation, and the current account deficit, because prices are going up, because the prices of things we import are going up. On growth, that would mean higher prices of many inputs, and this is most critical in agriculture. I'm abstracting from the welfare dimensions of this at the moment, just the macroeconomics. Also some industry, polymers, plastics, etc. On consumer inflation, obviously things will become more expensive. Petrol and diesel prices will rise if you let it pass through, and therefore there will be an impact on inflation. And finally, there will be an impact on the balance of payments, because whatever we import is going to become more expensive. In my view, well, not my view actually, Sajid Chinoy, who I respect greatly from JP Morgan, has done a forecast, so I don't have to do my own, which I respect and I will take, because it helps me shoot from over someone else's shoulder. So $100 oil price shock will result in a less than 0.5% hit to GDP, a 1.2% increase in our current account deficit from present levels of about 1%, so that's 2.2, and an inflation hit of about 3%. I think this is handleable. If it becomes $120 a barrel, and today it is 111, then the shock is much worse. It's about, we'll go into sub 5 GDP, he says. Inflation would be anywhere between 4 and 5% incremental. And the current account hit will be such, the current account deficit will be upwards of 3.5%. Of these three, inflation will stay within the zone, less than 6. So that's okay, if that estimate is correct. And this is persistent oil prices at $120 plus for 6 months. Okay, let's take that as a timetable. He hasn't given one, let me give me one. So if we look at this situation in December 31, you should be looking at that sort of hit. GDP sub 5, we've been there before in a bad year. It's not zero. It's not going to be negative like COVID. It's going to delay our growth and prosperity. It will probably hit the poor the hardest. So there is going to be, but it's something that we can weather and manage unless other shocks compound the problem, until this shock is over. And if the shock goes on, we'll have to find alternative ways of running our economy to push our GDP growth rate up. So I'm upset about the GDP hit, but not worried. I worry the most about the balance of payments for the following 3 reasons. Number one, the major part of this shock, not all of it, but the major part of it is going to come from imports of petroleum oil lubricants, including fertilizer. In 2017, I had calculated that the price elasticity of demand, for petrol was 0.6, which means a 10% rise in petrol prices results only in a 6% fall in petroleum demand. Petrol is highly elastic. Moreover, once the price goes from 100 to 120, the discretionary consumption element, think taking my car and going to the mall, that's discretionary consumption, that you'd have already stopped doing. If prices go even higher, it's going to be impossible for you to reduce demand. For example, you have to cook, right? You need cooking gas. You have to drive to work. You have to take a bus. You have to take a train to see your sick mother. So all these things are not going to change in demand irrespective of price, right? So on the balance of payment side, you're going to see a greater and greater hit. Now, the way you can deal with it is typically to try and hope that, the balance of payments will be controlled through more rupee depreciation. But then remember how we finance our balance of payments. So the more you depreciate the rupee, the less attractive it is to put money into Indian markets for foreign investors. You are already seeing that happening. Foreign investors are quitting the market in an accelerated way. They already were a bit earlier after the war has begun. So from all fronts, we are going to be hit very hard on the balance of payments, and we have to watch it like a hawk. I have 4 measures, I won't go into them, that we need to keep our powder dry on, or rather the government of India needs to keep its powder dry on and give up its bad habit of doing everything on the hoof. They have to start thinking very acutely about December 31 and the balance of payments. So to summarize, there's a balance of payments hit which worries me. The rupee is going to depreciate more, and that's going to hurt the government because the rupee creates a lot of noise in middle class circles. I mean, most of India doesn't care what the rupee dollar value is, but they do. But the rupee depreciating is also going to affect a more important constituency, which is those who finance our current account deficit. Inflation is going to be within zone, ceteris paribus, other things remaining constant. GDP, we will take a hit, but the hit is not a hit that we have not taken before, even without a crisis. So I'll say, for me, zeroing in, it's balance of payments, balance of payments, balance of payments.
Thank you, Rathin. I think you preempted my question, and I think I want to deviate a little bit from the short term to talk about the long term, because while we're talking about balance of payments, one of the things that the world has woken up to is reviving their competitiveness. In the last 2 to 3 years, whether it's the tariffs or it's the EU announcing its industrial policy, it is again a race to build by building barriers to trade. Which I think remind us of all the discussions we've had in the past over decades on things like immiserizing growth. We've talked about inequity of trade while promoting openness. And my question to you is that are we seeing a new race towards new industrial policy? And what does this mean for economies? And is really signing of free trade agreements useful to promote trade?
Well, on the last question, I think you are the expert, one. And two, I'm biased by being a finance ministry person. It's always traditionally been the case that finance ministries look at free trade agreements with skepticism, because to them, it causes only revenue losses, and they don't see the gains coming in terms of GDP growth. Commerce ministries, trade ministries have a different view, and therefore there's no settled wisdom on this subject. That being said, we have to understand very clearly that two things. One, that paradoxically, we are in a very good place when in a world of less trade competitiveness and less tariffs, because we were never in that game anyway. India's share of world exports is what? 0.8%, I think. Yeah. And imports is a little higher. It's about 1.2, 1.3. We are not players. We are largely a domestically oriented economy. So the very fact that we have failed SEZs, we've tried everything, and we have failed miserably to become an export powerhouse. I often speak of it in terms of your general readers, listeners, viewers. Mahatma Gandhi once went for the Round Table Conference to London in 1932. And he was asked, what do you think of Western civilization? And he said, I think it would be a very good idea. In the same way, I think India's becoming an export powerhouse would be a very good idea, but I've been waiting for it all my life. It hasn't happened. So that means that it is basically our domestic economy that has been powering growth. Other than services, which is not in this conversation at the moment, where the fear is more of the redundancy of our service exports due to AI, LRMs and other things, and that's an industrial policy issue, as much as the equivalent of industrial policy. How do we become competitive in the services that the world will demand going forward? And that's a whole trade-oriented conversation on IPRs, etc. But when it comes to manufacturing goods or agriculture, we've never been a powerhouse. The only one place where we are going to take a hit is what I call the sort of Ambani place, which is India has benefited hugely from historic crises by importing crude oil, refining it and selling it for a profit, including civil aviation fuel, which we are net exporters of. They just imposed an export ban, right? So there'll be a hit there. In terms of if countries put up barriers or things like that. But otherwise, I do not think that this world of tariffs is going to affect us badly. It might have a positive impact. We might start taking the big question which I've always put before trade enthusiasts. China was able to become a trading powerhouse with a lot of infant industry protection, which we have also given, but by in the end making sure that what they produced in their country to sell abroad, which was also demanded in China, was as affordable to a Chinese as it was abroad. We have never done that. I'll give you an example. This shirt I'm wearing, quite a famous example. Those of you, I apologize to those of you who heard it, now called Rathin shirts. Someone said that to me in a seminar the other day. So the shirt I'm wearing, for those who haven't heard this, cost 3,000 rupees. Marks and Spencer, almost 100% made in India. Shirts costing less than 300 rupees, 82% of them are imported from Bangladesh and Vietnam. So we can make shirts for rich people, we can't make shirts for poor people. Hopefully this crisis will force us to start making shirts worth 300 rupees competitively and affordably for poor people to buy. That will boost growth, improve our balance of payment situation. So the democratization of the structure of the economy to harness home market demand through affordable price, or through making things and selling them at affordable prices competitively with the rest of the world, is where I think our policy focus should be. It should always have been there. I've been arguing this for 7 years. But now hopefully those in power and the elites of Delhi and Bombay will see no choice but to move in that direction. And then I would think this country has been blessed with the current global external difficulties.
You make a very interesting point of not being able to scale and working on high margins as the business model. And so that sort of brings back the question of why is it that we're still missing that competitive edge? And the other related question, which you also mentioned in passing, is about the jobs, right? So even AI in the services sector is agnostic to job creation in some ways. And so do you think that we can or we need to reflect about a job-centric model of growth, even if it's export-led? And what does that mean for margins for us in the international and domestic market? And can we then have the scales that you're imagining?
The jobs that we can provide in abundance in the short term, I'm not someone who looks at 2047 very seriously. Anyone can say anything they like about 2047. Have to be produced geographically in the poorer parts of India in greater measure, which is northern and eastern India, and have to be produced using the skills that the average Indian already has, plus max 20%. So many of the jobs that we are talking about are not going to be available to this lot of people in terms of what we export. The people in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, your average common person who passes out of school, with a 20% increase in their skills, numeracy, reading, etc., they're not going to become even coders, which is why all those jobs went to South India and to Western India. So in the north and east of India, where the majority of the population live, where the per capita income in UP and Bihar is less than Nepal, that is where we make a dent on employment and on our GDP and on prosperity if we create jobs. So now the question comes, what kind of jobs can we create? Thankfully, the jobs that we can create for people with only a 20% upskilling are jobs that are not going to be impacted by AI. Why can't we invest in improving the labor productivity of agriculture? And to do that, I would say you need to do this. You need to do two things. One, you have to get a target of a 15% return on investment in agriculture. Two, that 15% return on investment should be such that real agricultural wages go up by an amount enough to keep MG, NRE, GA, whatever it's called now. I can't remember what it's called, not Jai Gandhi or something. Anyway, what is it called now? NRE, GA, do you remember? They've changed the name. Anyway, whatever it's called now. That demand should automatically fall by an increase in real wages agriculturally across the country. That means that our investment has to be massively, not in agricultural output, but in agricultural efficiency and profitability. That policy shift needs to happen in the Ministry of Agriculture, across agriculture ministries and across our farm policy, affecting a range of things. It's not just agricultural reforms. We will have to do the hard work of doubling farmers' income. I had something to do with that. Now it's only a slogan. But that would involve, for example, converting the country into 15 agroclimatic zones or 20 and asking what percentage of people can be employed in these agroclimatic zones with investment such as to get them a 10 to 15% return and their wages go up by 4-5% a year. So, the income doubles literally in 10 or 12 years. That is what we need. That is a sort of agricultural policy we need. A job-focused but productivity-focused agriculture. Second is 300 rupee shirts. Now, the trouble is that these shirts are made in Gujarat and in South India. And I'm not able to persuade entrepreneurs from Gujarat and South India to go where labor is cheap, to go to UP and Bihar, set up these units and make those shirts there, because you don't have then the logistical task of transporting them. I'm not asking you to transport them to Japan. I'm asking you to make them in Gaya and sell them in Allahabad. And I'm asking you to make them in Muradabad and sell them in Kanpur. I'm asking you to make them in Jhansi and sell them in Guna or Gwalior. Maximum 100, 200 kilometers logistics. Logistics is a weak point, right? So, but they're not willing to do this. And because they're not willing to do this, we are uncompetitive in making 200 to 300 rupee shirts. So we do need a policy for industrialization and investment in northern and eastern India. And if there are political economy constraints to it, we have to be honest about it and put them on the table, which unfortunately our political establishment is way too immature to do. But it can be done. The third and most important area of creating jobs is also an area where maximum welfare of Indians can be impacted. Education and health. These are two areas where there are huge number of jobs, but we have to fix the back end. Starting with school education, going up to higher education. I am now working in a university which is private. Next to me, there's a university which is a busted flush. It's a public university. I see no reason. It has lovely real estate, such as Allahabad University, or many of these have lovely real estate. I can't see why the government cannot infuse new life into these universities by getting the right kinds of people in to create good departments that are R&D capable, whether in social science or in STEM, and which are able to produce education as opposed to credentials. The country at the moment is geared to a system that churns out credentials. The country is not geared to a system that churns out education. When you are educated, you will get R&D, and to educate people is both expensive, requires investment, and creates thousands, millions of jobs. Ditto with healthcare. We produce the best healthcare in the world for you and me. We do not produce the best healthcare in the world for your average Indian. I'm not talking about poor people, just somebody who earns double the per capita income. Investment in improving the quality of affordable healthcare, whether you do it publicly or privately, is a separate discussion. Will be jobful, will be GDP increasing, and will be another area where we can increase the quality of our growth and maintain its pace by tapping into affordable home market demand. To summarize, number one, we need to focus on affordable home market demand. Number two, we need to focus on jobs that are created in the poorest parts of India and don't require more than 10 to 20% upskilling. Number three, we need to invest in the back end of skills massively in education and health. Number four, we need to solve any political economy problems, which I'm not an expert on, that are preventing logical economics from happening, which is capital flowing to where the labor is, rather than labor, what we call here migrant workers in the same country, moving to where the capital is.
Thank you, Rathin. I can't let you go without one last question, which is something that you talk about quite frequently, which is the development and growth divide between the North and the South. And you have touched on some of the subjects on what policy should look like for creating more jobs. But just a last question on how do you think we could perhaps bridge the inequity or the inequality between regions in India? And there are specific sectors that you think would lead.
Yeah, I just told you one.
Yeah.
Make shirts in North India. Ask yourself what can, but the problem is twofold. See, at the moment, what is happening on the financial side of things is that the prosperous parts of the country are not investing in the less prosperous parts of the country. They are in fact sucking away capital and labor from the less prosperous parts of the country. So, for example, there's something called a credit deposit ratio, which is for every 1 rupee that is saved in Bihar, how much is invested in Bihar. If that number is less than 1, it means capital is flowing out of the state. The credit deposit ratios for all northern and eastern states are negative, are less than 1. The credit deposit ratios for all southern states except Andhra Pradesh are greater than 1. So which means capital is flowing, and obviously you've heard of the migrant labor problem. Labor is flowing from north to south. Now, I can't resist saying this, but this problem would be solved through standard public economics, through standard public choice. If Biharis became Keralites, right? Which is that so many Biharis came to Kerala, learned Malayalam, settled there, and became effectively Malayalis, that the population of Kerala would increase. The population imbalance would in fact be corrected partly, and delimitation would be less of an issue. And the prosperity of Kerala would increase because labor would come there and capital would be spent there. That ain't going to happen for many reasons, especially because, largely because we can't go into that. We have a caste system which does not allow for interoperability. The best way you get interoperability is through breaking marriage endogamy, right? This is good sociology to enter. The interesting thing about endogamy of marriage in India, which I was quite shocked to see, is that irrespective of where you are, whether it's Kerala, the richest state in India, the richest major state, or Bihar, the endogamy in marriage is 96%, which means 96% of Keralites or Biharis marry within their caste, within their community. So if that is going to happen, and we don't going to get large-scale migration, that solution is out. The second solution is very simply for South India to invest in North India, which they are not doing. I think this is more within the realm of policy, and we have to see why this is not happening. Instead, what is happening is that every finance commission comes and gives away through the income distance formula a disproportionate amount of public money from South to North India, causing a lot of bad blood. So if you could solve that by South Indians actually making money by investing in North India, that would be a positive sum game. At the moment on the financial side, we're running a negative sum game. So that's the second area we've got to look at. The third area we've got to look at is more political, delimitation. I have an unusual view on this as a South Indian. I think we have been committing an injustice with North India for many years. The deal in the constitution was every person has one equal vote. By freezing the parliamentary constituencies on the basis of the 1971 population, we have deprived UP and Bihar, I'm not popular when I say this where I live, of the equality of one person, one vote. Many more Biharis per MP, many more UPites per MP than Keralites per MP today, thanks to the population change. But if we do the delimitation accordingly, then we will have a problem, which is that UP plus Bihar plus one other North Indian state will have a permanent majority in parliament. And that will be unacceptable, in my view, to southern and western India. Therefore, we have to have an honest conversation about this, where we explain why we are discriminating against UP and Bihar in terms of our electoral politics, promise an exit from that discrimination, and return from that, obtain commitments to increase both prosperity and a greater internal market in labor, if you will, and any other such thing that creates equalization. So actually, we can use this moment of political tension, in my view, as a moment of political opportunity. But for that, the South has to recognize two things, which I've been going on about. One, that delimitation is, without delimitation, the status quo is grossly unfair to northern and eastern India. Number two, such migrant labor as is coming to South India is largely being used just to perpetuate a feudal lifestyle. Let me give you an example. I've asked many chief ministers in India, including Kerala, what is the price of a cup of tea in Cochin or Chennai? They say the price of a cup of tea, cheapest, is 10 or 15 rupees. How can that be? Their per capita income is bigger than Indonesia, and the price of a cup of tea in Chennai or Cochin is the same as in Patna. Why is it the same? Because they're getting in a lot of migrant labor to make that tea. Migrant labor is not being used there to increase productivity or to increase output. It is being used to perpetuate a low-level informal feudal economy, and the South has to stop that in their own interests, and that will also benefit the bridging of the divide.
A quick last follow-on question is that, is there anything within the tax or any other incentive regime which could tilt capital in favor of the states that you're talking about?
No, you cannot use taxation to do that, because taxation has to be seen to be universally demonstrably fair. You could do a bargain saying that I will keep delimitation frozen, I'll buy your vote in exchange for lower taxes, but that benefit will only go to the very small elites in the north, right? You cannot have a differential GST. In fact, you bartered that away by creating a national GST, right? So on the tax side, I don't think you can do much. On the spending side, we're already doing it. The Finance Commission is taking our divisible pool taxes and giving them disproportionately to the poorer parts of the country, which just happen to be northern and eastern India. In fact, what the Finance Commission has been doing in response to sort of pushback on this is giving things like what demographic dividend 10% or something he did this time. So, but this is my problem with all these things. We have to take our country a little more seriously and stop fooling about like this. Give 10% here, give 5% there. The last time they said population, So they took the 2021 census, no, 2011 census, of course there isn't a census, 2011 census. And in exchange, the last commission, not this one, said, oh, but we'll also give you the same amount of money for demographic control. Now, these are games that, bureaucrats play. These are not games that people don't see through or recognize. It also gives the impression that we are not serious about this major problem confronting our country. So I don't think, in economist terms, to put it very politely, now that I've said it very frankly, marginal changes in policy will not work. We will have to do absolutely drawing board changes to policy and propose what my former boss in the Finance Commission, Dr. Vijay Kelkar, used to call grand bargains.
Thank you so much, Rathin, for being so generous with your time, and thank you.